it's jarring to the ear, and it should be jarring to our ears in 2024. And often the initial response, of course, is to move on. And sometimes maybe we should move on. And yet I think there's always wisdom in everything we tend to hear and see. There's always something for us to consider and ponder. When it comes to the sacred text, certainly there is. And sometimes in our own kind of sense of fear and apprehension and anger, we might push it away. And I think we miss something when we do just that. And so for us today, I want us to kind of dig a bit deeper into this beautiful letter that has this segment of it that is really troubling, because it's part of a conversation we like to have together here as a church about how do we engage the text in a way that speaks to us about the day-to-day of life, and what's our answer to this text. So part of what we need to recognize together as we hear it is that obviously we don't view the world in these ways today, and that's okay. Human beings from the very beginning of our time have been adjusting and changing and evolving. We good at learning to adjust to our environments and to think differently. And especially after the Enlightenment, we are people who are aware that we need reason, that reason matters, and that we should engage reason. And in fact, all of that, theologians will remind us, is part of divine life in us. In other words, the reason why reason matters and why reason needs to be paid attention to is that it's part of who we are as human beings. So divine life does not want us to put reason aside, but instead wants us to engage it. And so one of the first things we need to recognize is that these folks were writing in a different time. This writer today, Paul, most likely, was writing in a different time, a letter to a people, very contextually to those people, and that's part of the reason why it sounds weird to the ear. If we could transport ourselves to first century Corinth, this letter would probably make a heck of a lot of sense. That doesn't mean that we're going to agree with some of the basic premises underneath it. It just means that for us, it wouldn't be such a jarring effect as we read it, especially as it relates to the way we think of ourselves and our families and our relationships today. This part of the letter is around the household codes, and we need to understand that part of the reason why these folks understood these things this way is because they understood kinship to be highly important. Bloodlines mattered, and people lived in community together, multi-generations in one place, and there were these sense of collectivist living, a collectivist culture that worked together and had all sorts of notions about the duty that they had to one another, and the way the way one person behaved affected the other person. They also had an understanding that there were roles that each of them had to play in their community, and that, in fact, they might even say that those roles were given by divine life itself. In other words, that God or the gods had ways of ordering the universe, and of course you're going to live into the ways in which this has been appointed by divine life. So you can imagine, if we're listening to it today, that we would struggle with this text. And yet, for example, we don't believe somehow that divine life appoints certain roles for each of us. We engage life in ways that makes us flourish, and we have choices that we have, and that's good, as we should. Often, even in my own life with my own children, part of the struggle of parenting is that you're trying to shape this person to be an individual while also trying to shape them in a particular way, at least for me, into the way of love and compassion and justice and peace, right? I'm trying to help them create a moral imagination that then sustains their own choices they make into their future, and that in itself creates a struggle, isn't it? I mean, anytime you're trying to pass on something, it could, as a parent, seem like you're kind of forcing the child to take something on, but this is the way of human life. And so I think one of the key things for me about these household codes is that it helps me understand that though I don't want my spouse to submit to me in any way, and to be honest, as the text tells us later, like I don't want to submit to my spouse either. That there is something about the way we live life together that matters, that creates its own sense of duty. Or we might not call it submission in a kind of negative way, but isn't there something in our lives together as a family that creates bonds, not just of kinship, but of duty? I think the ancients had something there that matters. That yeah, when we live life together, we have a duty to one another. In my house, we have chores that we all have to do as part of the household, and one of the toughest ones is dish day. And now the dishes are quite a beast to take care of each and every day. There's 5 of us in our household, and so they pile up very quickly. But the problem is that if you don't do your dish day, then the person who's doing the cooking the next day doesn't have dishes to cook with, and so it creates a struggle within the family, right? In order for the cook to be ready to cook, the dishes have to be ready, and so then you burden the person that's coming after you if you don't care for your role in the family. And so in the same way that we have these duties to one another, and that duty to one another helps us flourish together. Now that duty in the Christian tradition shouldn't be coercive. In the Christian tradition, it should not be in any way something that's manipulative or power over, for sure. But we do have a duty to each other, a duty to live life together, and not just as nuclear families, but really we have a duty to live life together as churches, for example, right? We coming together, gathering to worship God and to serve the world, there are some duties there too. But there are also duties we have to one another in neighborhoods and in cities and communities that it would be so easy to forget. And here comes these household codes and remind us that though those household codes continue to be used in some parts of Christianity to manipulate and to coerce and to oppress and to abuse power, that at their core, it's maybe a reminder to all of us that we're dependent upon one another, that we need each other, that family matters, and that whatever configuration of family it is, that we have a duty to one another so that we can all flourish together, and that by the power of the Spirit, we should then exercise our role in our families, whatever that role is, in a way that invites the other, and in a way that encounters the other, and in a way that wishes the other well in their own flourishing. See these household codes at their root are really, to me, an invitation, not to misogyny or to patriarchy, which is the way, honestly, that it's been utilized in the church and in the world, but an invitation into ideas together of how are we, in light of our encounter with Jesus Christ, how are we going to live our lives together in that way that we have mutual responsibilities and duties and mutualities and shared flourishing. That requires sacrifice in some ways. And you know that in your own setting. Maybe at the workplace, you've recognized that in your role at the workplace. Or maybe you know that in your own role in your own family. Or maybe you recognize that in a situation you've had, that with each step you take, that living life alongside others means that there are things that have to happen, and that you have a role to play yourself. Now, that again, there's agency in that and responsibility, right? You have the ability to respond in particular ways, but there's still, if we're going to live life together, which we should, we're social animals, we're meant to live life interconnected, then we can't be living our lives as if no one exists but us, right? Because then actually what happens is if each of us just live the way we want to live without any sense of duty or connection or interdependence, then actually we could do a lot of harm to other people. If I decide that my dish day, I'm just not going to do it because I'm not feeling it, then all of a sudden I actually burden the rest of my family members. Or imagine if I don't pay the mortgage on 1 month because I just really don't feel like spending the money on it, just don't want to, all of a sudden my family doesn't have a place to lay their heads, right? So maybe as we read these letters in an ancient way, we help kind of understand the mythology underneath these letters, the ways that they explicate human nature and life together, the way they shine a light, maybe even when they show kind of the negative way of that, maybe that grabs our attention and it allows us to then see more expansively what he might be trying to teach us about life for us today in 2024 and beyond. See, to me, this is kind of the secret sauce of what the sacred text can do if we take it in this way, if we mythologize it and then struggle with it together. The church has indeed used this passage so often to oppress women and to support misogyny and to strengthen patriarchy. That's just the truth, folks. I'm not going to try to say otherwise. Today, the invitation is to encounter the text, to see it in its context, in a kind of first century collectivist, Middle Eastern setting, and to then take it together and read it in a way that helps explicate some wisdom. We don't want power over. We don't want manipulation, coercion. We don't want oppression by anyone. We don't want divine life to be utilized to do those things either. And yet, we're human beings who live life together in all sorts of ways. So how are we called to mutuality, to shared life? How are we being called by the power of Christ to be freed into that life together so that then all of us flourish? Ourselves, our families, our neighbors, our co-workers, friends, enemy. How do we live that life? The more I talk about it, the more I recognize there is some type of shared submitting to one another, right? There's some shared sacrifice we do together. There is something here about what it looks like to be Christ-like in this way, and then be together agents of freedom for all people. No, not just our family members and our kin traditionally, but the kind of kingdom that baptism welcomes us into, a kingdom beyond bloodlines, into all people, all of humanity, all of creation. That's the kind of household code that I want to be thinking about and practicing together. Thanks be to God. Amen.